Hello, I'm Councillor Ron Whittle. I'm chair of the Blackburn with Darwen Audit and Governance Committee, and I'd like to welcome all the people that are attending the meeting. I do have to initially read out a statement. I apologise for this, but it's legally I have to do this. It's a little bit long, but still. This meeting is being held virtually in accordance with Part 2 of the Local Authorities and Police and Crime Panel Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authority and Police and Crime Panel Meetings, England and Wales Regulations 2020, and the Council's Supplementary Council Procedure Rules. In summary, the regulations were brought in as a response to the coronavirus epidemic. They remove the requirement for members to be physically present in the room. They allow us to debate, participate and vote through remote video conferencing, whilst observing the social distancing measures needed to restrict the spread of the virus. Can I ask all members and officers and auditors to observe the following principles? Please mute your microphone and turn off your video at all times unless I have called upon you to speak. Remember to mute your microphone and turn off your video again when you have finished. You can indicate at the beginning of the meeting, i.e. now, if you want to chat, or more likely you'll want to speak. You want to speak during the meeting. There is, as people, those familiar with Teams, Microsoft Teams, will be aware that there's a chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. If you, with your name against it, if you want to speak, type Q and send that, and then I'll pick up. I'll be looking for the Qs to see whether you know who wants to speak, and I'll try and it will also show me in which order people have requested to wanting to speak. If we, in terms of voting for a small meeting, I will ask each councillor in turn. But I imagine most of the things are done on the nod. But if there is any controversy, we will vote that way. The other thing is remember that this is streamed live, so obviously people all over the world, if they were interested in it, could view us, and it also will be saved and broadcast on YouTube. So obviously, watch your P's and Q's if nothing else, and I hope you enjoy the meeting. The first item is the minutes of the last meeting, I think. Can it be moved that they're a correct record of the meeting?
I think we'll have to move that one to the next meeting, Chair.
Okay, or unless if other members join us.
Yeah,
are there
later. Yeah.
Okay, we do. Is everybody happy to do that? Any dissenters? No. Are there any declarations of interest that people would want to declare on any of the items on the agenda? I take it as read actually that the auditors obviously got an interest in the items relating to them, but in addition to that, is anybody else?
Just to advise, Chair, as well, I've had apologies from Abdul Patel.
Oh right, yes, we have. Yes, we had apologies from Abdul Patel. There are a few people missing, but we haven't had to date. We haven't had their apologies. Shall we move on to item number 4? An external audit. I mean, can I ask one of the auditors, would they like to introduce item 4A and 4B? That would seem appropriate. Do you want to do that? I'm going to invite you to do that, John.
Thank you, Chair. So John Farrer from
or Gareth, Audit. Which either of the two of you.
Just try and get my camera going. Yeah, so John Farrer from External Audit. Just make the committee aware that we have a new member of the team on the meeting tonight, Gareth Winstanley. Gareth has recently taken on the audit manager responsibilities for the Blackburn with Darwen Council audit. Pleased to say that Gareth has been a colleague for many years. He's got a significant amount of local public sector audit experience. In terms of the item we have here, item 4, it's a letter that I issued to the Council's Director of Finance back in March. Clearly a great number of matters have happened since then. There are a few things that I would just draw to your attention. So the context of the letter was to set out the scope of our audit work for 2019-20, and at an early stage flag to the Council some anticipated variations to PSAA's scale fee for the 2019-20 council audit, and some of the background to the reason for those variations, particularly the regulatory environment in which audits are conducted. Since I issued the letter refers to IFRS 16, the new leasing accounting standard. The adoption of that standard across the public services has been deferred. So it was due to come in to effect from the 1st of April 2020. That's been deferred now to the 1st of April 2021. The other thing I would mention, in the letter we refer to the timetable for completion of the Council's 2019-20 external audit. At the time, we envisaged completion by the 30th of September. Unfortunately, there have been some sickness within the external audit engagement team. That is meaning we're having to revise the anticipated timetable for delivery. The timetable for accounts preparation and audit for 1920 has been revised in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. So authorities having until the 31st of August to prepare draft accounts, and as external auditors, the deadline for auditing accounts and for the council to publish audited accounts being pushed back to the end of November. We're working with the council's finance officers to reschedule the audit work, which is now likely to take place in September and October, and we'll work with officers in relation to a date for an audit committee to receive our audit findings report at the end of the audit process. The letter also refers to future developments and the new Code of Audit Practice. The NAO has published that Code of Audit Practice now. As a firm, we're digesting what that means in relation to value for money work in particular for the 2021 financial year. We're waiting on some further guidance from the NAO at this stage, and we will communicate with the finance team around the impact on the 2021 audit, and indeed bring forward papers to the audit committee in due course on that. So those were just some changes I wanted to flag to your attention, Chair, but just happy to take any questions on that letter.
Well, Councillor Andy Kay has indicated he'd like to ask a question. Andy, unmute yourself.
Right, I'm on mute. Right, in the letter it talks about the FRC now has a 100% target for all audits to achieve a 2A, and it then goes on to explain that if you don't meet a 2A, you're basically in deep doo-doos. But there are two parts of it, really. It says we will required to undertake additional work in the following areas, and there's a list there. Are those included in the audit fee, or are they additional when it talks about additional work? And second, is there a comparison between the current audit standards and this new 2A1 standard that we can make an equivalent guess at? Because what I'm concerned about is how close we are to meeting those requirements, or how close we will be to meeting those requirements.
Okay, so the essentially the scope of external audits, or the work we're required to undertake, has increased over the last 2 to 3 years. The sort of regulatory expectations in terms of the quantum, the extent, the scope of audit work, particularly where there are external experts, external management experts involved in the preparation of accounts, so particularly for property, plant and equipment valuations involving property valuation expertise and the actuarial expertise for the net defined benefit pension liability. Our regulators are expecting auditors to go further and into more detail in challenging the work and the assumptions underpinning that work, and undertake more work in terms of verifying the data that's provided to those management experts for them to undertake their work. So it's not to say that these are areas where we haven't done audit work in the past. It's just the expectations as to the level of detail and the quantum of that work have increased quite significantly. So the scale fee included work in those areas. It's just now, since those scale fees were set, the quantum of work has increased, and so as a consequence we're setting out our anticipated impact on fees in those areas.
I'm not
Sure.
quite
Do
sure.
you want to come back, Andy? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I quite got that last bit. Does that mean, say, everything that's included in those lists for the additional work is included in the audit fee, or are there additional costs for the experts, etc.?
Yeah, so we have set out in the fee there our anticipated variations to the PSAA scale fee for 2019-20. So those are the variations we expect for performing that additional work. I think the only uncertainty at the moment is clearly we are delivering the audit in a very different environment to that which we anticipated when we set out the audit plan, set out our plan in that letter. So working remotely, verifying audit evidence remotely does take a little bit more time. So it is possible there could be additional audit costs as a result of remote working. Clearly, we'll work with the council to minimise any impact of that. If there were additional costs, we'll discuss those with the Director of Finance in the first instance. But at the moment, that letter sets out my best estimate of the fee for delivery of the 1920 external audit. Just to pick up on your question around levels 2A and 2B. So we don't year in, year out get an assessment of the quality of individual audits across that scale. The Financial Reporting Council and the Institute of Chartered Accountants England and Wales Quality Assurance Department do undertake reviews each year of a selection of the firm's audits, and they'll attribute scores. The bar is raising, the expectations have shifted from that level 2B to 2A. In common with the other firms, not all of our audits are meeting that 2A standard, so we're investing more time into audits now, more junior time, more reviewer time, more senior engagement lead time. And as a firm, we've invested in our central technical teams to provide more support to local auditors, all aimed at ensuring that we can deliver to that 2A threshold into the future.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else like to ask any questions? No. Well, in fact, I if you don't mind, I will ask a few questions. I mean, I noticed that the reasons why the fees may you've sort of warned us to be fair about it, that because of the high standards, the valuation of property, plant and equipment, and information you need to get on the pensions for the actuaries and things like that. I know that they've been cited as additional reasons. I noticed, I just say, do you think that is going to be further complicated? But because I read the paper that you did about from Grant Thornton about the impact of COVID-19 on valuations, and so obviously the value of plant, obviously if we've got the value of property, plant and machinery is going to be changed by the changes in the market, aren't they? You know, shops, premises, all sorts of things are going to change. Is that likely to be on top of that as well? The effects of COVID-19.
So we will clearly have to apply significant challenge to those experts through this this audit. We're seeing valuers. There was a RICS, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors valuation practice alert issued earlier in the year on the back of COVID. What we're seeing is a number of valuers including essentially caveats within their reports and flagging material uncertainties around valuations at year end. So where that's the case, we'll be looking to see that the council has included appropriate disclosures in its financial statements, that we're comfortable with that, around investment properties and retail premises. I mean, the retail sector particularly hard hit through COVID. We will be applying challenge to the valuers and understanding how they've reflected that in their valuations at the 31st of March. So I wouldn't necessarily expect additional audit fees because of those COVID-related challenges and questions around the year-end balance sheet. I think there's a possibility of additional fees just due to the additional time in verifying evidence remotely, the restrictions and the challenges of delivering audit work remotely like this. We've not done this before. Got good cooperation from the council's finance team. You know, we're sort of all working to the same end. Don't anticipate further variations at this stage, but I can't rule them out. If there are additional costs, we'll discuss that with the Director of Finance in the first instance.
Okay, any more questions for anybody? I take it we're now, the next item would actually be 4C, which is the PSSA email to Louise, the Section 151 officer. Am I right? Is everybody, are you okay that we moved on to that now? John, is that,
That's fine.
Did you want to say
yes.
anything else on that? So Louise, do you perhaps want to outline what the letter said and your response to it, please? Louise, you're muted, by the way.
Yep, I'm here now. Okay. Yeah, it's basically a summary of from PSAA. So PSAA being the body that has been appointed by the majority of authorities, local authorities in the country, to contract on their behalf for the provision of external audit services. And obviously there was a lot of issues raised last year regarding the increase in fees, and so PSAA have in their email to Section 151 officers have summarised the position regarding external audit costs across all 3 financial years, and from 2018-19 through to the 2021 audit, and highlighting the pressures and challenges that have arisen in the sector, and which has in turn increased the number of proposed fee variations. So I suppose PSAA being the independent body, he's giving some validation to say that they have looked at this independently and can see that the pressures that the external auditors are under, you know, working with them and making those representations to the local authorities, and highlighting the point that if there are to be fee variations, that actually we need an early heads up on that and an explanation of to what the fee variation is and why it's arising. Because one of the criticisms that were levelled at external auditors last year was it was very, very late in the day when we found that out, you know, obviously we've worked well with Grant Thornton, but that was kind of a sticking point for us, as it was for many other authorities across the country. So PSAA is just giving some kind of independent verification that there are those pressures and the concerns are very much real.
Right, thanks, sir. Any comments on that? By the way, I just like, for those who might have joined since before we start, you know, since the beginning of the meeting, if you want to speak, then ideally you should put a queue in the meeting chat and send it. If you haven't got that facility, just pipe up, because I wouldn't want people to miss out on saying what they want. Okay, is everybody happy with that? So all of these are just a note, so there's no decisions to make. So what about the future procurement and supply options at the PSSA? Would you want to say something about that as well, Louise?
Yeah,
because that goes into a lot more detail, doesn't it, about...
Indeed, really. So item 4C was the email that PSAA sent to myself and other Section 151 officers to give a summary of why there were increasing fees and pressures. Item 4D sets out the findings from a further independent review. So whilst PSAA are independent of us and have contracted for external audit services, they then in turn commissioned another independent body to look into the actual supply of public sector external audit services, and the report really gives some background as to say, you know, the contracts across all of local government were let to 5 audit firms back in 2017. It goes on to highlight what the challenges are, the increasing levels of scrutiny, the regulatory pressures, as John talked about earlier, about the extra work that's required in terms of the pension fund, in terms of valuations of PPE, etc. And at that same time as the increase in regulations have been introduced, we've also been, as a consequence of the tender process, the actual fees that we've been charged have come down. So I think what the independent review was saying, well, who else is out there to be able to provide this service? And because local authorities are so specialised, we would have to have an experienced local authority to come in and do the audit, because it is a complex area of work. There are 9 firms approved to be able to do local authority audits, and 5 have current contracts with PSAA. Not everybody chose to bid, and so I suppose really that the whole report is just really giving a heads up to say that the contract will be retendered in the future, but there are a lot of issues in the market. There is not an extensive supply, and for those people who are in the market, they have concerns that the price is very competitive and arguably low, given the additional amounts of work that are required for that. So it's an independent review and a heads up really of what's in store when the contract is retendered.
Right, thank you for that. We've got an indication that Councillor Andy Kay wants to ask a question or make a comment. Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just a quick comment. On page 33, there's a little table there that talks about the current work for PSSA, eligible bodies, and the number of caps, which I presume is key audit personnel or something similar. And it talks about, well, take the example of GT, which I presume is Grant Thornton. It talks about 40% by value of opted-in bodies, 183 audits with 26 caps. And I'm just wondering what that actually means. What does that mean? 26 people are doing 183 audits between them, or is that something totally different?
I can perhaps clarify that. So the caps are key audit partners, so that includes myself as the engagement lead for Blackburn with Darwen Council. So I personally audit 5 local authorities audits across the country. Then I have a central role for Grant Thornton. My colleague engagement leads between them audit the other 178. So my colleague Gareth, who is on the call, is an audit manager but not a key audit partner. So it's the person who ultimately signs the audit opinion on the council's financial statements and signs the value for money conclusion is the cap. That's sort of a regulated position, so I had to be approved and authorised by the ICAEW before I could take on that responsibility.
So it's just the responsible person who sign off then?
Yes. Yep.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Right, anybody else want to comment or ask questions before we note that report? Is everybody happy to note the report then on that basis? Right, thank you. No dissenters. The next one is perhaps I'm not sure whether the auditors or perhaps Louise, do you want to go on to finalisation of last year's fees?
Yeah. So as we just touched on earlier, last year, as we noted, it was quite some way into the audit and towards September when we found out that additional fees were additional contract variations were going to be raised for additional work that had to be undertaken. Things like additional work around PPE, additional work on pensions. There was extra work last year related to the McLeod pension adjustment and what impact that had on our accounts. And so those variations were put forward. Some of 4 in total, 2 of which were agreed. We agreed with the additional work that was required in respect of McLeod. And also we agreed with the variation that relates to Blackburn with Darwen being what is called a PIE. which a public interest entity because of an investment that we hold, and it just requires some additional audit work as a consequence of that. And I can note that actually we no longer hold that investment, and therefore that variation will not be required in this financial year. So of the additional fees of contract variations of 13,000, we were more than happy with 7,000 of those, but the other 6,000 we disputed, and we referred that through to PSAA for adjudication. We put our argument to say that the variations came through late in the day. We were not clear about what additional work had been undertaken, and similarly Grant Thornton made their representations as to why there was additional work, and it was difficult to have notified us before that time. So the adjudication was that of the 6,000 disputed, that there should be a payment of 3, and therefore instead of the total variations being 13, those have been reduced down to 10. So I just bring this report forward to note to Audit Committee, as it has been on the agenda on previous occasions, and just to bring the matter to a conclusion, that it has been adjudicated. We can go, you know, personally I can say we can go along with that decision, so it's just seeking approval to do so, and that you're comfortable with that.
Anybody else want to comment or ask questions on this one? No, I mean, I think I think it's interesting that, I mean, obviously there was some sort of quite heated discussions at previous meetings about the about this, but I think what's been illuminated, I know there's a lot of words and paper have been would have resulted, but I mean, I suppose one thing is that it does give, I mean, certainly from my point of view, it gives a better picture of the market and how that works with auditors. And I mean, we want to work with, obviously we want to work with our auditors, and they have to be challenging, or else they're not doing their job. And as I noticed in previous, the PSSA says that auditors need to adopt, based on experience in the private sector, a greater degree of scepticism. So obviously that may mean more examination. So I think we are. I think there's a better understanding now as to why fees may, you know, there may be some additional fees in future. But it's nice to know beforehand, I think, is the point. What, you know, and then we can have a chat about it and say, do you think that's okay? And we say, yeah, that's okay. And although obviously the final arbiters is the what are their initials, PSSA, who actually do the procurement of these services anyway. But I just thought I'd add that, because I mean I think it's nice when we, you know, we've reached a settlement on this, and you know, hopefully in future, you know, we just bubble along together. Right, we're now on the treasury management. This items 7 and 8. Have you got anybody come along for you, Louise, or are you going to introduce these 2 items on treasury management?
Is it item 6 on there, the external audit progress report?
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I've missed. Yep. This is Earl Grey tea. It's not gin, I assure you. But yeah. Sorry, my eyes wandered. Yeah, all right. Thank you for correcting me, Louise. Sorry. I think I should resign, but anyway. Right. Item 6 then, that's the auditors, external audit progress report and sector update. I should cross them out, shouldn't I, the ones we've dealt with. Anyway, go on. Thank you, Gareth.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take that report if I may. As John mentioned in his introduction, I've taken over the audit manager responsibilities from Simon. So it's probably just beneficial for all committee members if I give you a little bit of a potted history and background about myself. I've been involved in the local government audit sector for over 25 years, so come with quite a lot of experience and knowledge of the sector. Previously, I've been the audit manager for a number of local authorities within the region, so Burnley Borough Council, Chorley Borough, South Ribble, more recently Warrington Borough Council just outside in Cheshire. And currently I also am responsible for the audit of Lancashire Police and Cumbria Police. So certainly in the sort of local government sector, hopefully you'll see that there's a breadth of knowledge and experience there. Now, if I could go on to the report, if I may, what you've got here before you is the normal progress report that you've probably seen in previous meetings. The first part of the report is primarily sort of progress on the audit and where things are up to. And then the latter pages, primarily for background information, are the various reports that have been issued nationally and within the sector since the last meeting. Probably if I draw your attention then to page 60 of the report, page 60 in the pack, or page 4 of our report, where we highlight there the progress around the financial statements audit. And as John has already mentioned, obviously since the last meeting there's been the COVID pandemic, which has meant that we are all now working remotely, and we've had the issue unfortunately around some staff sickness, which has meant that the final accounts audit has been delayed slightly, but we are confident and we will be hitting that deadline of the extended deadline of the 30th of November. In terms of one of the other areas of work that we focus on as part of the audit, our value for money conclusion, we've undertaken our initial risk assessment, where we are focusing on 2 areas this year. Not surprisingly, we'll be looking at sort of financial sustainability and looking at the in-year reporting arrangements, budget monitoring arrangements, and also the outturn position and whether you have delivered the savings and the bridged the gap that you were identified at the start of the year. And also the sort of second area that we'll be focusing on this year is around the inspections that have happened at Blackburn, the Ofsted inspection around sort of focus visit on children's services, and the joint inspection with CQC around disability and special education needs. So primarily there, we're just looking at the arrangements for ensuring that recommendations made from those regulators are being followed through and worked upon, and processes are in place to implement the recommendations that have been made. The next page highlights the audit fee. I wasn't intending to go through that in any more detail because of the discussion that has happened early on in the meeting, but just to confirm that the audit fee there is the audit fee that John was talking about in terms of the 90,186 figure that we've just had a bit of discussion around. And in terms of COVID, we've highlighted there the impact that we envisage on our work this year, obviously the remote working, and we're already having several discussions with finance staff around how this is going to work. And I must say they've been very positive, and we've already started to introduce what is a new sort of software system called Inflow, which allows for the smooth transition of data and evidence between ourselves and your finance team, and that seems to be working well at the moment. The next few pages, as I mentioned, are primarily here for background information, are the various reports that have been issued and sector updates since the last meeting. I wasn't intending to go through these in any real detail, but perhaps just alert you to the report on page 65 of the pack, which members of the committee might find of interest. That is a report from the National Audit Office around a series of questions and challenges that Audit Committee and members of Audit Committee might find useful around financial management and financial reporting as a result of the recent or ongoing COVID pandemic. So you might find that a useful read. I wasn't intending necessarily to go through that report in any more detail, but happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Nobody's indicated so far. I've got. I just wanted to just correct something really on. I know that it covers a lot of ground. Obviously, your report. I noticed on page 4 it says that a number of our directories were overspending, and in fact, I think it would be true. That's not actually the case at year end, because all the directories came in under, other than children's, and even children's was actually less over than was perhaps it looked like earlier in the year. I appreciate you're tracking it through the year, but certainly at the end of the year, our staff and managed to claw things back, and came, all bar children's came under. So I think it's, I'd like to obviously give an opportunity. It gives me an opportunity to thank staff for making those things, but also to just just to clarify for yourselves really that we did turn it round, with a lot of, it's not easy, but we did turn it round to a great extent. It looked worse partway through the year than it was at the end, because we wanted to prepare ourselves, because we need, we are a prudent council, and we are trying to manage the austerity that we've had over the last 10 years. So, I just thought it was worth pointing that out to you.
Yes, I mean the reference there was about sort of the in-year reporting position, and you are correct. There was two overspends at the period that I was originally looking at in Q3, but as you quite rightly say, at year end the position had improved.
Right.
So,
Anybody else? Oh, I've got Maureen, Councillor Maureen Bateson wants to ask a question or make a comment. Maureen?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Sorry, you've still not got any pictures of me. You talked about looking at a number of reports that have been done throughout the year from various external agencies, and how those different departments will respond to the recommendations. Given the COVID problem, I just wondered how difficult you think the council might find it to put into practice some of those recommendations, and the pressures that they may face in other areas that the council and those departments wouldn't have expected to face. I know there's difficulty, you'll find difficulty yourself in looking at some of the figures and the problems that are faced, but I suspect as we get back to some sort of normality, there will be big pressures within all departments of the council that haven't really been currently identified, and I'm just wondering if you're finding any of those pressures so far.
Thank you for your question, Councillor. The work on our value for money conclusion is primarily focusing on arrangements and trying to satisfy ourselves that you've got appropriate arrangements in place. So what we would be looking for is to see that there's an action plan, that there's maybe people responsible for the individual recommendations, and of course we would acknowledge the very challenging set of circumstances that council staff and indeed everybody is going through at the moment, and that will be considered most definitely as part of our overall summary and conclusion. So it's more around ascertaining that there's proper processes and arrangements to make sure that those recommendations have been considered and are being acted upon where necessary under the challenging circumstances. So it won't necessarily be if a recommendation hasn't been put in place at this stage that would negatively affect our conclusion. We take a considered assessment and we'll look at that in due course. We haven't started that work yet, so unfortunately I can't give comment on the progress at this stage, but that's something that we will be doing over the next couple of months.
Anybody else on that? I'd just like to, on the financial implications of the COVID-19 virus. I was thinking it might be, we could perhaps have a discussion, a broader discussion on that, and look at our current position when on item 11, when we look at the risks, because I think that's is quite a risk at the moment. But is that, so anybody else wants to say anything on item 6 before we move finally correctly now on to Treasury Management? Any other comments? No. Right, okay, Louise, on now properly at the proper time. Agenda 7 and 8, if you want to kick off on those two.
Okay. Okay, so the Treasury Management Report is covering the period from the 1st of March through to the 31st of May, and obviously the Audit and Governance Committee carry out a scrutiny of the Treasury Management function. The report itself is in the usual format. It gives an overview of the loans that have been taken out during that period, of the investments that have been made, and takes into consideration the loans that have also been repaid, and a brief narrative really on any significant changes in Treasury management. So the Bank of England interest rates have been historically low for a considerable period of time, since August 2018, when the rates were reduced to 0.75%, and we would not have thought we would come across a period when they fell lower than that. However, on the 11th of March, as a stimulus because of the COVID crisis, that was reduced by 0.5% down to 0.25%. And then on the 19th of March, reduced even further to 0.1%. So the impact of those Bank of England adjustments are such that borrowing in the short term particularly has become even cheaper. But similarly, any surplus cash that we have available for investing, the rates of return that we get on that are lower. So our policy has and strategy around Treasury management, as has been in place for several years now, is that we borrow short. So we borrow in the short term to just fund our day-to-day cash flow requirements. The capital programme that we have is not as significant as it once was, and a lot of the schemes that are included within it are funded, grant funded anyway. So we just tend to be able to borrow on a day-to-day basis, and we just borrow for our cash flow needs. And obviously that is at a cheaper rate of interest than entering into a long-term arrangement. Over the period, you will see that our short-term or temporary debt did increase. So in February that was down at 69 million. This is shown in the table on page 74. So at the at the end of February, it was at 69 million, rising on the 31st of May up to 84 million. And the main reason for that increase was, if members recall back at Finance Council, approval was given to prepay our pension contributions. So that's both the employer contributions and the employee contributions for the next 3 years up front. So that required a payment to the pension fund of approximately £38 million. By us paying into the pension fund up front, those contributions that we would have been expected to pay over the next 3 years, in return for giving the pension fund that money early, they have then been able to invest that, and because they've been able to invest it, they have then given us a discount. That has generated savings across the 3 years of approximately £1.5 million, and so has been a significant part of our savings programme. When we looked at the savings to be made, those savings are stated net. So that takes into consideration the cost of the borrowing that we would have to do over that period to make the upfront payment. And probably that's about as much as I want to say. The appendices obviously are in the usual format, detailing where our money is invested, and the proportions, and our compliance with the prudential borrowing requirements. But happy to take any questions.
I haven't. Nobody's indicated they want to ask any questions or make any comments on that one. Have you covered? Do you think you've covered? Have you covered number 8? Do you think, or 7 and 8, or is there anything more to say?
No. If I just turn then to item 8, the report is the outturn position for 1920, and that the information in there has already been reflected in the 1920 outturn revenue monitoring report that was reported through to Exec Board on the 9th of July. The annual report really summarises, what our strategy has been, which again is borrowing in the short term in the main, unless there is a significant need to borrow long term, or if short term rates started to increase quickly, to switch into long term. It also contains just a review of the financial markets and the climate within which we were operating, which obviously changed significantly in the last month of the financial year. Summarises our performance and the breakdown of our loans, but really it's an amalgamation of all of the reports that have been brought through to committee during the year, because during the year obviously we just look at it from one period to the next. So that would be a summary of our position. Nothing more to add on that.
Right. Okay. Was there any comments? Nobody's indicated. No. Okay. But is that we're happy to note that? Right. Thank you.
Popped a question up, Ron.
Oh, sorry. Right. It's only just come through, Andy. So I apologise. Oh. Come on.
Just a quickie, really, about municipal bonds agency and whether or not there are any advantages to us at this time.
It's definitely one that we are watching. So we are an investor in the municipal bonds agency, so we would be eligible to participate in any issue that the bond agency did. But I think the big one was they did one for Lancashire County Council several months ago, in fact probably before Christmas, and managed to attain good rates, but it does tend to be for longer term borrowing, so we don't really have a need for that at the moment. It became more attractive when the Public Works Loan Board increased unexpectedly and overnight. I think we found out the night before that they were going to increase their rates, and they did so at 9:30 the next morning, so there was no time to act if we had have wanted to borrow some long-term funds. But as a consequence of PWLB increasing their rates, which primarily has been done because many councils were, well, it was felt that many councils were just borrowing to invest and investing speculatively, as a deterrent, the interest rates were put up because you could borrow cheaply and then in turn for better rates. That has caused huge issues with councils, because there were some that were doing that. I mean, that's evidenced. It's been in front of the Public Accounts Committee that is the case. But there are an awful lot of councils who have been hit by the increase in interest rates of PWLB, that actually were only borrowing because they had a justified need to do so to finance the capital programme, to provide that day-to-day cash flow. So in answer to the question on the Municipal Bonds Agency, it is now much more competitive with the PWLB because they have increased their rates, but there is some discussion and there's been pressure put to the Treasury that those rates should be reduced, because it's kind of the action that they've taken has been sledgehammer to crack a nut, rather than tackling those individual councils who have been risk takers. They've penalised everybody. So we are just keeping a watching brief really on the Municipal Bonds Agency, but at the moment we don't have a need to borrow in the long term.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer the question? Yeah. Okay.
And it's fair to say we haven't been, as you implied, we've never gone into that sort of speculative side of things, have we? So, but as you say, it's always bad when other councils suffer for the actions of the minority. Okay, is everybody happy with that? Any, I've no other indications of speaking of people willing to note that report. Thank you. Yes. Right. Okay. I think it's well, I think, if I'm wrong, but I think we're on the agenda to 9 now, which is audit and assurance, progress and outcomes. Colin, did you want to, Colin Ferguson, you want to introduce those?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the regular progress report that the internal audit team bring to this committee, and it sets out the progress on the audit work during the period from 1st of December to 31st of January. 31st of July this year, and it is compared to the approved audit plan which this committee received in April 2019. It covers the corporate governance, counter fraud and internal audit work that we carry out. It provides you with the summary of the overall opinions provided for the 17 audits that were completed in the period, along with a commentary on the 4 limited opinion audits. And it's just worth noting there that none of those would have a significant impact on the overall control environment that's in place within the council. Also just worth bringing to committee's attention, the table on page 94 of the agenda pack sets out the summary of the 14 red management assurance framework issues that were reported by directors at the 31st of March for committee's reference, and it compares those to the half-year position. And worth noting that 10 areas have been on on the red, identified as red issues, continuing from the half year, that there were 4 which had reduced compared to the half year from red to amber as at the year end. There were 2 new issues and 2 that had increased from amber to red during the period. Happy to take any questions on any of the details.
Anybody want to ask Colin any questions? No? Are people happy to accept that report? Yeah.
Good. Right.
So go on, Colin.
Me again, Chair.
Yes.
If we just move on then to the counter fraud annual report. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to the next screen. So this, sorry, no, it's the item 10, the audit plan and internal audit charter. So the internal audit team is required to work to the standards set out by in the public sector internal audit standards, and those standards require us to have an internal audit charter in place, which is approved by the audit committee, and it sets out what the internal audit's purpose, authority and responsibility is. Just for the purposes of the committee, there are no changes to note to the charter since it was last approved, which was last year. So that's included here for committee's reference. And then moving to the internal audit plan, which is appendix 2 of the internal audit charter this item. Section 151 Officer Louise is required to have an effective internal audit in place, and this draft plan, which is attached for committee's approval, identifies the areas which have been included in the 2020-21 audit plan, and these were identified following discussions with each director, also looking at the departmental and corporate risk registers and the audit universe. So it identifies as a resource of 735 audit days identified at the start of the year, coverage of the priority areas, which will enable me to produce the annual audit opinion report to provide assurance to this committee and to council on the adequacy and effectiveness of the risk governance and control framework that's in place during this period. And just worth noting that the plan is flexible, and if there are emerging issues or new areas of risk or concern that are identified during the year, we would discuss those issues and areas with the relevant department and director, and potentially flex the plan to take account of those changes. We obviously then report during the following year to this committee on progress against this plan. So happy to take any questions on any of the details.
Nobody's indicated, but does anybody want to ask questions at this point? We're asked on this one, we're asked to approve the audit and assurance plan, the internal audit charter, and to note the progress and plan changes. Are people happy to do those? Well, is anybody not happy to do it? Is probably the easier question. Everybody happy with it? Any objections to that? All right, well, we move on to 11, which I think is you again, Colin.
It is, yes, thank you, Chair. This is the start of a number of items on the agenda in terms of annual reports, which this committee receives as part of its terms of reference, and looking at the role this committee has around the risk governance and control framework across the council. So the details that we provide cover a number of different teams across the council, including the risk management arrangements which are in place sort of corporately and departmentally, civil contingencies, which covers the emergency planning and business continuity activities, information governance and insurance, and also the events management arrangements. The committee receives this report to help it fulfil its responsibilities around the adequacy and effectiveness of the risk management arrangements that are in place, and to provide evidence that those arrangements have operated effectively during the previous year. And there's a summary by each of the teams of the activity and key achievements for each of those areas during the previous 12 months, and some planned developments for the next 12 months. And in particular, just to bring to your attention, and I know you noted, Chair, that there was a couple of things to do with the impact of COVID-19, but just noting on page 127 of the agenda pack, 3 changes to the corporate risk register, and the details were provided in appendix 2, which unfortunately was missed out of the pack, but we will circulate those separately, and if you have any questions around that, by all means send me an email. But the changes to note relate to corporate risk 1, which is the risk that the council fails to achieve a balanced budget, and that risk score has been increased as at the 31st of March to take account of the impact that COVID-19 has on or the potential impact that it has on the council's financial position during the next 12 months and going forward. And also to note that as at the 31st of March, there was a new risk added, risk number 20, which was in respect of the impact that COVID-19 might have on the ability of the council to deliver its critical services. And the other point to note was that the score for the residual risk score for risk 13, which is around the risk of a data protection or a privacy incident occurring, has been reduced due to the increased level of controls that are in place around that area. But happy to take any questions on any of the details, conscious there's a lot in the report.
Nobody's indicated, but you've got an opportunity now to ask if you want to. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I thought this might be the stage where we could perhaps have a look at the council's position, financial position as a result of COVID-19. All right, technically, this is about the annual risk management report for 1920, but in fact, the risk chart associated with it goes up to the 30th of June, and obviously, as Colin has indicated, the risks did appear at the end of last year, but now are now growing. So I just wondered whether I'll just ask perhaps Louise or even perhaps Vicky as exec members to outline, perhaps both of you could perhaps give your commentary on the facts around our financial position as it stands. Louise, perhaps first.
Okay. So following the lockdown arising from COVID, the council has incurred significant amounts of expenditure in responding to the crisis, be that through the provision of PPE, be that from the setup of the food hub to support vulnerable and shielded people, from supporting our adult social care, the sector, to ensure that they had sufficient funds to look after the individuals discharged from hospital, from the impact felt across all portfolios where contracts were in place, but the contractors were unable to deliver them. The government message was to support those contractors through this period. So not only did we incur significant additional expenditure, but we also incurred significant income losses, because as a result of the lockdown, you'll know that we had to close our leisure centres, King George's Hall, Darwin Library Theatre, the museums. That impacted on car parking, not as many planning applications. So it's had huge impact across both expenditure and income. Increased expenditure associated with COVID was forecast for this financial year to be just short of £10 million, and the loss of income forecast for this financial year as a result of COVID was forecast approximately 19 million. So in total, we had additional costs and loss of income of 29 forecast. The government has given us some support. There was a tranche 1 of funding which was allocated to councils across the country, and that was portioned out using an adult social care methodology. There was a second tranche of funding, and that was done more on a per head of population basis, and that was specifically targeted to try and assist in addressing the loss of income that that councils had incurred. So the £29 million additional costs and loss of income, less the funding provided by government, which for Blackburn with Darwin was just over 9 million, still left us with a financial gap of 19.5 million. Now, the government MHCLG have asked us to report on a monthly basis what the actual costs are, what the actual losses of income are for each specific month, and to forecast for the year. The last return that we completed was on the 19th of June. And the next return is due in on Friday, the 31st of July. So we are just working through that at the moment and refining our forecasts. So back in June, we declared on that return that looking at those things, and obviously I should have said as well, it also takes into consideration the significant expected loss in income relating to business rates and council tax through non-payment or anticipated related non-payment and difficulties there, but also the increase in the cost of council tax support. Because through the furlough scheme, although individuals have been managing to get some income, that income has been significantly impacted. A lot of individuals, we've seen a significant increase in the number of universal credit claimants, and that has had a knock-on effect to council tax support. So our costs have have escalated there. So we reported that through to MHCLG, and we were hopeful that there would be further funding. At the time we submitted the report, there were rumblings that something would come through, but from government's earliest position, which is we stand behind councils, we will support you in whatever it takes to get through this crisis. That was said in March. By the time we got to May, Robert Jenrick, Secretary of State, had kind of said, yes, absolutely, we will stand behind you and we will support councils in all that we have specifically asked them to do, because of course they will have done other things that they will do at their own cost. And I paraphrase there, I must say. So we were trying to work out then, if we didn't get any extra funding, how we would be able to address the 19.5 million gap. If you look at our level of reserves has been reported to Exec Board and to Finance Council, that with 10 years of austerity, and Blackburn with Darwen has had the highest percentage reduction in core spending power of all unitary authorities in the country. Over the past 10 years, we've had significant savings programmes, but inevitably we have had to utilise reserves to address the financial position each year. And as a consequence, our reserves have diminished somewhat. So looking at the level of reserves that we held at the 31st of March, and from those, excluding those reserves over which we don't have total control. So, for example, the DSG and the school reserves, and also items that were included in reserves at the year end, but were specifically earmarked for to be spent on items that were already committed in the very early days of the new financial year. If we exclude those, we would be able to pull together just over 7 million, which is the balance in our unallocated reserve. And if we looked at all of our earmarked reserves and redesignated them to address the COVID crisis, we would be able to pull together just over 8 million. So we had a gap of 19.5, but our level of reserves that we could kind of muster to tackle that would be 15.5, but that would absolutely wipe out all of the council's controllable reserves. So that was an issue. We have been in discussions with the Local Government Association, with MHCLG. They are aware of our position. The leader has written to the Prime Minister, he's written to the Secretary of State and to MPs to articulate the significant financial position that we find ourselves in at this time. On the 2nd of July, Robert Jenrick announced further funding to be made available to councils, and that announcement referred to 3 kind of strands. The first strand was an allocation of 500 million across the country to assist councils in meeting the additional expenditure of COVID, and for that we have received 1.6 million. A second strand was a kind of formulaic approach to compensating or assisting in offsetting losses in respect of sales fees and charges. In that, the Secretary of State said councils would be responsible for meeting the first well, 5% of their total budget of sales fees and charges. If there was a shortfall on those budgets of 5%, they would be expected to be able to absorb that. If the loss is more than that 5%, then government would compensate at a rate of 75 pence in the pound. So for every additional pound of loss, councils would have to absorb 25% of that. So that is a positive, and obviously our sales fees and charges income that's lost, that's the bulk of it, leisure centres, etc., that I've referred to. So that is a significant element of government funding that we are keen to understand the quantum of. But the devil is in the detail. What the definition of sales fees and charges is, we have yet to receive, and whilst that sounds quite obvious, the government have made it very clear that they will not fund any loss of income that is deemed to be commercial. So it's what the definition of commercial income is. Does that relate to the rents on properties that we have owned in the town for many years, and it's not so much held because of the investment that they're going to, it's about regeneration and the growth and development of the town. So that has yet to be worked through. As I said, the announcement was the 2nd of July, it's now the 29th, and we have yet to receive further information on that. And the final strand relates to losses in respect of council tax and business rates. So the way that is accounted for is through a collection fund. So obviously we charge everybody for council tax and business rates at the start of the year. We look at the cash received at the end of the year, and if that is short, that is classed as a deficit on the collection fund. It doesn't necessarily mean that we won't get that money in the future, but for the financial year that is classed as a collection fund deficit and has to be made good the following year. So as things would stand, we expect a significant loss on our collection fund this year, and we would have to come up with a savings plan to address that next financial year, but it will be several £1 million. So what government has said is that they will allow councils to recover the deficit over a 3-year period, as opposed to the usual one. So that is a whistle-stop tour of the risk to the council as a consequence of COVID. Portfolios are still managing the budgets, tightly. We are scrutinising them, but some of the savings plans that we had hoped to work on this year, the staff involved have had to be redirected elsewhere. So we've got extra funding, so the gap now is not the 19.5 million that we reported in June, but it's very difficult to say what that gap is until we get more clarification around sales fees and charges and the collection fund.
Right, thank you. Councillor Maureen Bateson wants to ask a question. Maureen?
Thanks. Louise, obviously you've given us beside a depressing picture, as up to date as you can do, but obviously we're not out of the woods by any long chalk, and obviously we've not been able to open up some of our facilities. One, I presume this is adding to the problems, but if there was to be nationally a second wave, which obviously the Prime Minister is predicting, what would be the real implications for this council?
So in response to that, I mean, some of the costs that we incurred were for the an immediate response. So we had to go and buy the PPE because that PPE was not coming through quickly enough from government, and there was an urgent need for it. So some of the outlay was for items now that we would carry in stock and we will use over the course of the pandemic. There's other items. So, for example, we paid and contributed towards the setup of the mortuary at Wharton for across Lancashire. But again, you know, that is set up, although it's been mothballed, we wouldn't have to set that up from scratch. So there are certain things that that wouldn't, costs would be incurred, but probably not to the same extent. But there are definitely, you know, the longer our premises are closed, we are losing income hand over fist, day in, day out. You know, there are some hidden costs that still haven't come through, and you know, we've had many discussions around children's services. You know, whilst families have been in lockdown, there have not been as many cases coming through to us, and we wonder what the impact of lockdown has had on those families and on those children. And actually, once we come out the other side of COVID, whether we are going to see a significant surge in the numbers of children coming forward who are in need of our care and protection, which obviously will increase costs. So it is absolutely impossible to quantify what a second wave would do financially. We are not alone in this, you know, we're not an outlier, and the only difference I think for us is that because of the austerity of the last 10 years, because of the, you know, disproportionate reduction in funding we have had, and because of the disproportionate increases in adult social care and children's social care because of the demographics of our population, we're probably in a worse position from a reserves perspective to be able to weather the storm. Some other councils, they're spending the same, they're losing the same income, but they have more of a cushion to be able to fall back on than we have.
Oh, I appreciate that, and I'm trying to avoid children's services because I've obviously got a conflict there. But I'm thinking about our residents, many of whom may be losing jobs, the businesses in the town that may not start up again, and the loss of income in that sense to the council, and more need for people claiming benefits, or the loss of business rates and whatever. It's the impact overall in the town, not just, and obviously the consequential impact on the council, but our ability to actually deliver the services that we're used to delivering, which currently seems a difficult ask.
Absolutely, you know, it is, and so much of this will only come to the fore after we come out of the first wave, the second wave. You know, at the moment, some of this, although, you know, we are seeing the impact on residents, we've kind of been cushioned by the impact of the furlough scheme. But once the furlough scheme ends, whether those businesses you know, do make their staff redundant, don't come back to the fore, it's only then that we will know for sure. We are monitoring it. I mean, the council, there's many residents and many businesses are saying to, you know, where is my funding? How are you going to help me? And it's a really difficult message because we don't have the funding to be able to provide them with anything further. We have administered the government's business rate scheme. So all business rate payers in the borough that had either paid small business rates relief or were in the retail, hospitality, tourism, leisure sector, if their properties were less than 51,000 rateable value, they were entitled to a grant. But that wasn't our decision as to who got it and who didn't. It was the government's eligibility criteria, and they also give it that, and we got £46 million to enable us to pay all eligible businesses. We've paid out £39 million of that, we've been given just over £2 million for discretionary support for businesses, which we are working through at this moment in time. But you know, as I say, that they want more help, more support, but we don't have the funding to address our own cost pressures, let alone theirs.
Right, thanks, Louise. Nobody else has indicated they wanted to speak, but I was thinking of a question. I mean, it's a deplorable situation to be in, that we don't know. I mean, it's the uncertainty, isn't it, as much as anything, about what money we will get from central government to compensate us for the loss of income and the costs that we've incurred. And that makes, I mean, over the 10 years, we've managed to get a balanced, you know, at the end of the year, we've managed to keep the show on the road and get a balanced budget. And we're determined to do that. But it may well be some months, it might even be at the last knockings that we know whether we're able to do that. And it's going to be very difficult. I mean, you've talked of using all of our reserves that, you know, that we could possibly do. I mean, we should have a minimum amount of reserves, so that if we wipe those out, then you know, that's not in a good position for even if we survive this year, it won't be very good for next year if we wipe out all our reserves because the government hasn't given us the money to balance things. I mean, what sort of level of reserves would we need? You know, is there a statutory amount as a percentage of our budget? What would it represent?
So the minimum level of reserves is we say is the minimum level that we would hold in the unallocated reserve each year, and that is agreed by Finance Council, and there is no set methodology for doing this. There is not a kind of percentage level that you're required in proportion to your expenditure. It is something for the council to determine. Everybody does it quite differently. The approach that we take is really to consider as many kind of risks that could arise. So that be you know, a huge influx of insurance claims that where we had significant excesses. It could be, you know, something to do with VAT. It's a whole host of different risks that could arise, and what we try and do with each one is attach a financial value or cost to that risk coming to fruition, and then just apply a 50% rating to say, well, you know, that's what we've accounted for. Let's assume there's a 50% risk attached to that scenario. And I suppose, for want of a better word, it's an accumulation of all of those disastrous things happening on the same day, or 50% of them happening on one day, and that number happens to come out at £4 million. So that is the minimum level of reserves that we have, and it's as a cushion to be able to provide for unexpected, unanticipated risks coming to fruition.
There's no other questions, but following on from that, I'd like to ask is that you said we're not alone, and I was wondering whether they don't have to, but whether Gareth and John have got any views on, maybe not our position, but well, perhaps that'd be useful, but just generally on the sector and what are the runes like, really, in terms of have they got any information or about what's likely to happen? The government may do, or also comparison with other local authorities will be interesting. So Gareth and John, have you got any views on?
Yeah, I mean, clearly a very, very challenging situation right across the sector. You know, I absolutely understand the position that Louise has described around reserves, and clearly you can only use reserves once. You know, we're sort of at the mercy of the government spending review at the end of the year. I think it is possible that we see some capitalisation directions from government. I mean, Louise mentioned the position in relation to collection fund and sort of recovery over a 3-year period rather than a 1-year period. So capitalisation directions might provide some opportunity to spread costs over a longer time frame. I think the other thing is the sort of section 114 considerations if the council is getting into that position where reserves are depleted and unable to set balanced budgets. The sort of position is to approach MHCLG at an early stage and start that that dialogue. I don't know where the council is up to in its sort of thinking around whether that may become necessary. Louise mentioned there are some authorities in a sort of a more fortunate position in terms of reserves. That is certainly the case from draft sets of 1920 accounts I've seen. Some authorities do have very sizable accumulated reserves. Unfortunately, Blackburn isn't in that that category. It's difficult to know how this is all going to play out. Unfortunately, Chair, it's just a really unfortunate set of circumstances. I suppose I would echo the point Louise made. You're not the only authority in this position. Probably can't shed any more light. I mean, it's just the world is a very uncertain and difficult place at the moment.
Right, thank you. Andy, did you want to join in?
Yeah, it's just a point that's just been raised there about capitalisation potentials, which worries me significantly. I mean, we've always tried to avoid capitalising revenue costs for the obvious reason it costs you a damn sight more in the long run because of the borrowing cost itself, unless government's going to pay the charges in relation to that, then we will be in deep mire for future years because you've obviously got to make the cut to cover those costs as well. I think it was the last example of that was at Northamptonshire, if memory serves me right, as a result of the section 114 that was imposed on them. I'm just wondering whether John has an opinion about capitalising the revenue costs, or Gareth.
Oh gosh. I suppose wherever possible, revenue costs should be charged to revenue, shouldn't they? I do take the point around storing up issues for future generations of taxpayers. I suppose it's just we're in absolutely unprecedented territory, aren't we? I'm sure government will be considering all possible options at the moment.
I mean, one of the things I was about to ask, Vicky, have you got anything that you'd like to add to what Louise has said? I mean, it's fairly comprehensive, but if there's anything else you want to add, I think the committee would welcome you as the exec member who's got to get a balanced budget at the end of the year. So have you got any views or any information you'd like to share with us?
Thanks, Ron. I think you're right. I think Louise gave a very good comprehensive view. She called it whistle stop tour, but actually she gave a lot of information and all very accurate. So there's not much really I can add to that. But I think it is important to mention, as has been mentioned, we're not alone. We're in very good company, and actually we're in good company with councils that have used their capital investment approach, where they've had huge income, for example, where the local authority has huge investments or ownership of airports, where they're now actually finding themselves in this position. So I think you made a point earlier in an earlier section that it is really important to note that we have been hit quite heavily with austerity and disproportionately. We have a disproportionate level of poverty within the borough, but also it's really important to note that when we look at the Q4 outturn last year, and as previously stated, the reserve figure was actually increased from the previous year because actually every portfolio had worked so tirelessly and so hard with the executive team that was in place last year to actually make those savings, make the programme savings, work efficiently, change the way they work in order to get best value for money. And actually, it was a really good picture just pre-COVID, and our trajectory was going well because we were underspending, building our reserves, and delivering the services that the residents of the borough need. Unfortunately, again, as has been said, it's unprecedented times. COVID has happened, and nobody really can give us an answer as to how long will COVID last, how many waves are we expecting, how quickly is a vaccine going to be available to our residents, so as we don't have to fear second, third and fourth waves if that potentially could happen. But unfortunately, it does seem to take a long time between the government announcing a pot of money. So as Louise said, you know, it's taken 27 days, we're on day 27 now, and we still don't actually understand what will be included with the loss of income, sales fees and charges. So without understanding that, it's very, very difficult to make plans that are robust to mitigate the risk that we're now talking about. So I think definitely there is a risk, but I don't think any of us are without hope. I know the External Auditor mentioned around Section 114. That is where we want to avoid. We absolutely want to avoid that. And as part of the leadership team, we're now we're scrutinising every spend that we have. So anything and everything that now needs additional spend, whether it be on the revenue side or on the capital side, is now going to a panel of the leadership team, where we're actually making sure that we're being frugal with the financial decisions to not widen the gap. And, you know, when Maureen earlier was talking about businesses, absolutely, there's unknowns with regards to the impact to businesses, the impact to loss of jobs, the impact to our local economy, town centres, but unfortunately the government haven't given us the power to assist all these different risk factors within the wider risk. We are absolutely lobbying, and I know that Mohammed is lobbying with Denise to say we need additional support. This second spike in Blackburn, again, we're talking to ministers to say we need additional support. We've not been able to reopen all of our services, and even the ones where we have, because of the second spike, there's now a prolonged impact to those businesses and to our local economy. So we're having the right conversations. We're not without hope. We're really, really hoping that between the government giving us more income and expenditure with regards to the impact of COVID, some really good frugal financial strategy, and the hard work of every council officer and every council elected member, that we're going to hope to get through this. But the reality is there's so many unknowns. I don't think anybody, the auditors, internal, external, any elected member, any officer of this council can say with any surety or clarity that we're going to get through this without any problem. However, again, we're not on our own. So whatever position we find ourselves in, we're not going to be there alone. We're going to be there with lots of councils. So there's going to have to be some fundamental change, I believe, with the government to say, this is the plan. This is how we're going to make sure that we don't interrupt the residents to the point that the council can't provide its services. So I think that's probably as much as I can give really at this point, because I'd be giving you my opinion rather than the fact, because the facts are we just don't know enough at the moment of all the unknowns. But you know, personally for me, I'd like to say a massive thanks to all the council officers and the elected members, because you know the position we're in, it could have been a lot worse without all the support and help from the council and of course the residents. I think it's really key that the residents, as they are, play their part. We stick to the rules as they're applied, and hopefully we can mitigate any further damage and risk to each other. I think that's all I'd like to say. Thank you, Chair.
Right. There's nobody else has indicated. I mean, I would say, you said you'd have to, you don't want to stray into making opinions. I suppose I can if I want to, but I mean, it's difficult. I would think it was difficult for anybody to say that Blackburn-Darwen Council, since its inception over 20 years ago, has been a badly run council from our financial point of view. We've always been prudent. We've always managed to get there in difficult circumstances. We've been Council of the Year 3 times over that period, and this is when, you know, obviously we've had changes of different parties running the council, but predominantly us at the moment. But it would seem ironic that we've done everything we've tried to, and that for reasons beyond our control, there's even the possibility of Section 114, and I think that's a real shame for the borough. I mean, I lived here 30 years, and I mean, it will be a real shame if it ends up there, which we will fight like mad to stop that. But it will be a real shame if we end up there for things outside our control, and it is very frustrating. But on that sort of happy note, should we move on to the rest of the agenda? Because we could dwell on that for the whole evening, couldn't we? So I know that was on the back of the risks. So can we do the? I think it's now 12 annual council fraud report. Colin again. But off you go, Colin.
I'm struggling, Phil. My machine's gone into.
Oh right.
Oh, am I live now? Right. Okay. That's fine. It's just I've got a spinning wheel on my screen, so I'm not sure what's happening. Right. So annual counter fraud report. Again, this is the summary of the counter fraud work and activity that was carried out during 2019-20. It includes the work that was carried out by colleagues which we coordinate, that's identified from the National Fraud Initiative, which is a data batching exercise that the Cabinet Office carries out biannually, and we follow up the results across the various teams in the council support that. Overall, the report provides assurance to the committee that there were effective measures in place within the council to enable it to the prevention and detection of fraud and irregularities during the previous 12 months. So happy to take any questions on any of those points.
Any questions or comments, anyone? Nobody's indicated so far, but no?
No. Shall I move on?
Okay, fine, yes, move on.
Yep. So agenda item 13 is the annual head of audit annual opinion report. And again, this is one of the requirements of the public sector or internal audit standards for me to provide an opinion to council on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the council's risk control and governance frameworks. And this contributes to the overall annual governance statement, which is later on the agenda. So just to
Oh. Am I the only person not to be hearing Colin at the moment?
Chair, Colin is just his machine has just crashed, unfortunately. However, we are in the same office at a socially distanced position, so he can come over and talk into my machine if that's any use.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Might be well to swap your handsets.
Yes, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I'll unplug mine now.
So apologies to people for this.
Right, Colin, you want to come over? Yeah. So if you plug into there, or do you bring it? Oh, you can speak into it if you want. Yeah, carry on.
No, yeah, fine.
Yeah, just get.
Apologies, everyone. Yes, my machine has now decided it's crashed and it's now going to restart. So I was just explaining the annual audit opinion report, and it provides a summary of the work that internal audit have carried out during the year. So it's a summary of the various progress reports that we presented to this committee during 2019-20 against the plan that was approved by the audit committee in April 2019. So the key points to note that the overall opinion is that the council does have adequate systems of risk management, control and governance in place, and that they've been applied to an adequate standard during the year, ended 31st of March 2020. There were no limitations placed on the scope of the work that was carried out by internal audit during the previous financial year, and also that none of the qualifications that we provided in terms of the finalised audit reports would have constituted a material weakness that would impact on the overall governance framework that would require disclosure in the annual governance statement. So happy to take any questions that anyone might have on any of the details in the progress report, in the overall annual opinion report.
Nobody's indicated. Anybody want to say anything? So is there any disagreement with the contents and the conclusions of the report? No? No? Right, okay, we'll move on then to number 14, which again is you, Colin.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, mentioned this a couple of times during the some of the previous items. The annual governance statement is a mandatory requirement for local government bodies set out in the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015 to prepare and have approved. It's an accountability statement from the council to its stakeholders, setting out how well the council has delivered governance over the previous years, and it sets out the key governance processes and procedures that are in place to enable the council to carry out and deliver its functions effectively. It does include an update on the actions taken during the previous year to address the significant governance issues which were identified in the 2018-19 annual governance statement, and also includes the significant governance issues identified for 2019-20, which will be monitored and reported on during the next 12 months. So there were 3 significant issues which are included in the annual governance statement, and one of those has been brought forward from previous years relating to the Children's Services financial position. The second one relates to adult social care commissioning and the demands and the marketplace there, and also the budget implications. And finally, the third one is reflecting the conversation which we've just had earlier in the agenda around the impact that COVID-19 has had and will have going forward on the financial position of the council. So that's clearly set out in the annual governance statement, and is something that we will be reporting on progress against that, and obviously Louise will report through the budget monitoring positions anyway during the year. So it's a requirement for this committee to consider the draft annual governance statement before it is signed by the leader and chief executive, and then it will be included in the published financial statements for 1920. Happy to take any questions.
Nobody's indicated any questions. Any? No. So is there any disagreement to on this draft? No. No. So I take it that we agree it then. So off you go. There you go, Colin. And the next one is you again, Colin, which is the Audit and Governance Committee annual report for last year.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've prepared this on behalf of the committee, and it just provides a summary of the committee's performance during 1920 in accordance with best practice guidance that have set out for local authority and police audit committees. And it provides evidence that the committee has been effective in fulfilling its terms of reference during the previous financial year. And the details included in the report demonstrate that the committee has given adequate consideration to all of the core areas to enable it to fulfill its role and responsibilities. And if this committee is in agreement with the details provided in it, it would be then presented to full council for council's sort of consideration and evidence that the committee is discharging its responsibilities effectively.
Right. Any questions? Nobody's indicated. And as Colin pointed out, we've got to consider and approve this report, and it will be referred to full council. Is there any dissent on that? No, I take it you all agree. that being, I think that's the last item. I've lost the actual agenda now. So because I'm trying to track it on screen as well as look at people. As far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the end of the formal business of this meeting. Yeah.
That's me finished anyway.
Yeah. I'll just check that. Next time we're going to have 2 PCs open, I think. One with, so I can see people, and one with the agenda. Oh, hang on.